very first event when we happened to introduce Charles Holstead, who is the author of The Good, the Bad, the Butlers. And I will at this time let him take it away.
Thank you. So it's always good to be down in Karnes County. I've spent quite a lot of time down here doing the research for the book, and also after that book came out, I was working in Flaccus. So I don't know how many of you have heard about Flaccus, but the cemetery over there. So I was doing research on that and cleaning the cemetery too, which for some reason I was doing that in like July and August, when it's 110. So anyway, but to talk about the Butler book, there were thanks to Sue. I mean, there was lots of pictures, lots of journals, different articles, all sorts of things that I use for resources. And then it's with the libraries these days, they're getting more and more of the old newspapers on computer, on digitized, so that's helpful. So you can be at home and get into like the Beeville or Kennedy Library with no problem. So it was always good, just even if I couldn't find some Butler information, just to find what the information from like the 1890s and 1900s, what life was like back then. But I mean, there was different stories about the Butlers, as the title says, some good, some bad. So, some of it was, the stories would be a little different, even though it was the same event, which was, a problem back then and problem now at times. So, it was all good. And hopefully, it was all, I guess, fairly done. So anyway, I'm not sure about what I'm supposed to be. Yes.
Charles had the opportunity to visit and interview Charlotte Nichols and my dad, Bill Butler, and Betty Gay Kennedy, and who else? But I realize now that I'm glad we didn't wait, because I'm pretty good at waiting for things. And if we had waited, well, then Charles would not have been able to interview these people.
Judge Butler too.
And that's right, Judge.
But he had talked to, so Judge Butler had talked to Edward Campbell, or Ed Campbell, who was a witness at Dalyville. And of course, this was like, Judge Ted Butler talked to him like 60 or 70 years later. But I mean, he, knew the information as if it happened yesterday, which, something like that, when it happens, you don't forget. So, it was, it was good. It was very informative, very enlightening. So, and the I've discovered a little bit more information, since it came out in 2014, I think it was 2015, and one of the trail drivers, drowned on one of the trips up north. So, and W.G. Butler made sure that he came back. Brought him back down to Karnes County. So, I think that was from, someone said that was similar to something that happened in Lonesome Dove movie. So anyway, the truth and fiction, similar at times. So, I don't know, does anyone have any questions? Yes.
What did you learn about the Danville shootings that you didn't already know?
Ooh,
Or that we don't?
I think pretty sure I put everything in the book. You know, the notes and the testimony from the inquest, you know, I think I, you know, put that in there pretty well. You know, I'm always kind of just struck about about all the blankets that were in the wagon. You know, later on, when they're talking about, you know, a couple of, you know, one of the pull-ins, you know, that was shot, you know, talked to his son and, you know, didn't want to name names, but they went out and looking for, you know, the killers anyway, and never come back, never heard from again. So, you know, Juan Coy going down to Mexico and hiding out there for a while, but then they track him down there and, you know, get him at some bar. So, which almost was an international incident in itself. So, just, I don't know, just, you know, different things, pieces of it like that. You know, I think one of the, you know, that there were 70 shots, at least 70 shots fired on the Butler side and seven shots fired on the Elder side. So definitely, you know, outnumbered. So, but yes.
Do you have any gut reaction sense about whether it was just pre-planned?
I think there was probably a little bit of planning. You know, there were a couple of people that knew some, you know, planning about it. I don't think it was widespread, you know. There were probably just some that, you know, joined in and saw an opportunity, you know, and took advantage of, or not take advantage of it, just joined in with it. So I don't know. You know, I think, what was it, Newton's, you know, I think, yeah, I was pretty surprised about it, you know, because, I mean, he was talking to some of the elders beforehand, you know, as if nothing was happening, so. Yes, ma'am.
I saw the Nichols,
Oh, okay.
and I was a man that was very sort of fever, but she got, and that's so that parishioner that can help.
Oh, okay.
Between Charlotte and the spread, they found out that there's still wrong ones between Butlers and the Northern.
Yeah.
You know, when they would ask the elder about the Butlers, they so that
Oh, yeah. I
interesting that still crash or something.
Oh, yeah. I remember that. Because Sue had, I'd met Sue at some place, I can't remember where, but there was some function, and we were walking, I don't know, wherever, at this function. It was a fairground somewhere. And some woman comes up and it's like, your great-grandfather killed my great-grandfather. You know, I'm like, oh my gosh, are we getting, you know, huh?
Chelsea.
Yeah. So I'm like, are we going to have a problem? So.
No, I was gonna mention one thing that we had never really talked about, heard about, was that at the time of Danville, Newton was actually married to. So it was kind of a bad go for Newton to go home and Mary says, well, you know, holidays and, you know, it was, I think your brother was the brother and uncle, that her brother and uncle, were both killed at that Daleyville event. So, but no one talks too much about one of the Butlers getting married to the elder. And then Mary had to go on, knowing of that tragic death and, what her husband knew was how, not how he was involved, but, he was involved. So that would get a strange, hard situation, I'm sure.
Do we know what happened with the wife of the
There's a newspaper article that talks about how things work after that.
Yeah, I probably did something.
I have knowledge on that. What happened is what I'll address it.
Oh, I'm good with this. And then I'll introduce Zach. Well, this phone did.
I seem to remember one newspaper article saying that there was like money collected for the widows, the elders. So, I mean, for some reason, $84 stands out, which would have been, a nice, good.
Now, there was some
Yeah.
defined art.
Yeah. So, that was it as far as, information on the widow. So,
Because you have to research,
let's see. Sue called me in 2009, so I started with that. Then, and the book came out in 2015. So 6 years, plus, I mean, every once in a while, I, run across, Butler or Elder or something, in the newspaper or some old magazine. So, it still kind of trickles in. But basically, almost 6 years. So.
But again, I'll introduce Zach Butler McBride, and we are also very proud to have him and excited to have him here to talk about his book and all the research he's done on the Butler family. And he is the son of Deborah McBride, who is Monette Littlepage's sister. So that's how he fits in. I think most of you, Monette's here for all of the reunions. In fact, we can all look forward to the Perfect Attendance Award. Monette would get one. Okay, take it away, Zach.
I think this microphone keeps on turning off, so I am just going to use my excellent projection skills. Yes, I also wrote a book. It's a Western novel, whereas Charles's book is a historical documentary detailing, facts, and it's investigative history. Mine is more of a dramatization. My two biggest influences as an author are Larry McMurtry, who wrote Lonesome Dove, and George R.R. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones. And so both of those writing styles influence my work. And in the way that George R.R. Martin based his fantasy stories on real history in England and Europe, and then incorporated it into his own created world. That's essentially what I've done with the Butler stories. All of the core characters, events, and interpersonal relationships between the characters are all based on very well documented history. A lot of my research came from Charles's book. I kind of used it as a bedside reference to go through and make sure that I wasn't, crossing various people up. But fun fact, my book also took me 6 years to write. And even though it's set in a fictional world, it's all inspired by the time period of the 1880s in South Texas. So in, down to the way they did their roads and how they constructed things, what types of rifles they would have been using. I wanted to make sure that if there were any historians that wanted to go through and nitpick, that they would be hard pressed to say, well, that's anachronistic. That's not how that wouldn't have been until many decades later. You had asked about what happened with the wife of Sheriff Elder, and I can't tell you much beyond the one document that I have, which is included in my book. It is a civil subpoena that was served to Newton Butler, calling him to answer for the crimes of murder and naming Sheriff Elder's wife as the central plaintiff. So she blamed Newton for it and sued him in court for it. I don't know what the results of it were, but we have boxes of letters between Newton and that part of the family that go back a long way. And I had the original copy of that document. I have love letters that were written between Newton and Mary Elder, and vice versa. And as I was telling Charles, that as the years continue, they start to be more like, hey, Newton, you haven't been home in quite a long time. When are you coming back? The children miss you. Werner saw somebody riding down the road, and he thought it was you and got so excited and went running out, and he was heartbroken when he realized that it wasn't you. So you can see that Newton was really troubled in the last years of his life, and I'm sure that the killing of Mary's brother and her uncle probably put a lot of strain on their relationship. And he drank himself to death in a hospital bed when he was 37, which I'm 38, and that was on my mind all last year. Was this is the year that this is how old Newton was when he died. So hope, it made me just uncomfortable to think about. You brought up that there were still tensions between the Butlers and the Elders. I'm going to say back in 2018, I went into a bar in Floresville, and I sat down next to this old man, and I said, "Hey there, my name's Zachary Butler." He said, 30 years ago, even up into the 1970s, if a butler walked into a bar where there was an elder, people would start leaving the bar because they were afraid that tensions would boil over. And this is what this old man told me, who's lived here his entire life. So I take his word for it. I mean, you can take it with a grain of salt, or maybe the older generations back in the 70s still held on to that kind of feud. As far as I know, there was no violence that ever actually erupted, but it was well known that the two families did not like each other, and so it was best to just stay out of the way. Yes?
My parents were in a banquet of some sort in Houston many years ago, and someone at their table was telling this story of how he had just inherited his pistol that his grandfather, whatever, had died trying to cock the gun with his teeth. And, this very elaborate story, and turned out he was an elder. And my dad said, well, mine was, pretty green. So that couple never spoke to my parents the rest of the evening.
It's funny that you mentioned that, because being a, being a descendant of Mary Elder, the Bud Elder, the sheriff, he was my great-great-uncle as well. And And growing up, you know, I tend to think of it just from the Butler side of it, and so I, you know, had this disregard for them. But then I realized, well, you know, that's part of my history there as well that most of y'all do not share. And Newton is buried in the Butler family cemetery, but his wife Mary is buried in the Floresville cemetery, actually right behind my grandparents, Robert and Mona. She's got a big, massive headstone there. And, but one of the things that I learned in researching my book is, and I had mentioned this to Charles, a lot of people are unfamiliar with the fact that Newton was apparently affiliated with a bank and train robbing gang called the Cornet Whitley Gang. And I've read that in the entire book written on that gang. Their most famous robbery was in Flatonia. Newton, as far as the official record can tell, Newton did not participate in the robberies, but he gave them safe harbor in his pastures. He worked with them, collaborated with them on the planning of the train robberies, and he provided disguises, including fake mustaches, and for his aid, he would profit from it. They would, you know, give him pistols that they acquired or watches and things like that. And, you know, a lot of people don't like to hear the potentially negative things about certain parts of the Butler family, but part of my outlook in writing my story is that everybody is human. And I had no intention of painting them as these infallible, idealistic characters. Everyone is human, and we all have our flaws. When I talk about William Green Butler in my book, he's portrayed as a little high and mighty. You know, he has a good moral compass, but his idea of what was the proper way to do things and how people should be, he had that pretty cemented. And people who knew him and disagreed on various subjects, you know, kind of thought that was a pretentious attitude to take. So you can be a very good person, but still be flawed. And so that was one thing I was very careful with, was not to idolize or, any of the characters. So they're all painted as very much human. And they've got their good suits and their faults. But anyone who is familiar with the Butler family story or this region, you'll notice all sorts of little references. Anybody ever heard of Weatrix Meat Market? Yeah, there's a scene in the book where one of the ranch hands gets kicked in the head by a horse, and they're sending for a doctor, and he says, "Should I get Doc Muchigamba or Doc Weatrick?" And the mother says, "Don't you dare come back with Doc Weatrick. The man's a damn butcher." And so it's just little things like that if you've grown up here and you know the land, you'll be like, "Oh, I get that joke." I'm very good at writing what I know. I've lived the last 10 years in Colorado, and I moved there in 2015. And I always say, you couldn't pay me enough to move back permanently, because I forget what it's like to sweat till I come back to Texas for Christmas. When I left my house Tuesday morning, it was 42 degrees. But in my book, as I was sort of crafting my own world, I basically took the Colorado Pikes Peak region and I squashed it down next to a region based on South Texas and Mexico. Because, it's writing what I know is very good. Like when people read my book, they say it feels like South Texas. Has anybody here ever heard the story about Burnell Butler's grandfather, William Florin Butler, and the North Carolina Regulators? The North Carolina Regulators was a group in the 1760s that apparently at the time there was a big problem with corrupt constables, basically just yanking people off the street, throwing them in jail cells until their families could come up with bail money. You know, it was ransom. And so what the North Carolina Regulators did was they would barge into courtrooms and they would drag the judges and lawyers out into the streets and whip them through the streets. William Florin Butler was one of the founding members of that group, and the first time that he was captured, 700 men marched on the jail where he was being held, and they turned him loose without a shot being fired. After that, he was branded as an enemy to the crown, and England put out a 1,000-acre bounty and a 100 British pound bounty for his capture. And during that time, there were a lot of these guys who were fighting before the Revolution. They were given pardons as long as they promised not to do it again. But William Florin Butler was one of the few people that it was specifically ordered under no circumstances was he to receive a pardon. The second time that he was captured, when he went in front of the magistrate, not only did he receive a pardon, but he received a 1,000-acre land grant so long as he vowed never to take up arms against the British government again. And about 10 years later, the Revolutionary War broke out. And so that's, before Texas, they came through Mississippi, but they started out up in Virginia in the North Carolina areas. And that, I've traced the Butler family back before William Florin Butler. I can trace it back to a man named Edmund Butler, who was, that's at the very early 1600s, or maybe late 1600s. But I was surprised to find that my mom had always thought that the Butler family name was English. But if you trace it back and follow the line as it goes to Edmund, he was actually from Ireland. And I'm under the impression that there were a lot of English-Irish that traveled back and forth, so its origins may have originally been English, but Edmund, wound up living out his life in Ireland. So yeah, I've worked really hard to try and trace the family line back as far as I can. Most people, they get back to William Green Butler and maybe Burnell, and they say, well, that's where the interesting stuff is anyway. So, but I found the North Carolina Regulators story to be really interesting. Okay, I don't know, my daughter is tapping her watch about something. Been 31 minutes. Okay, so I'm getting the wrap it up signal. You have one more question?
Yes. What evidence do we have that Burnell Butler was actually deaf and or mute?
There is. Do you have information on that?
I could answer that. In the back of his WG's ledgers, he kept a dream journal. So he would write about what he dreamt about. And one of the dreams that blew my mind, but he was talking to his dad, and he explicitly writes that he was signing to him. So WG knew sign language, Burnell knew sign language. Now, if that means he's a deaf mute, that's close as we could get, I guess.
Certainly sounds deaf.
Yeah. Those are my 2 cents. There's probably some other references to it, but to come from WG himself in a dream that he was signing to his father that must have passed away 10 years earlier.
I have always just read that he was a deaf mute, which I have wondered about the logistics of that as well, especially in South Texas and running a large family and managing land. Everybody's familiar with the story of what happened to Burnell, right? Well, the version that I'm most familiar with is that he was murdered by his son, which was it Robert Jackson, or I think it was Robert. but that Burnell had had him committed to a psychiatric facility for his alcoholism, and that his son did not take kindly to that. And the story, as I know it, goes that when he got out of the psychiatric facility, he went and pushed Burnell off of a cliff. And a week later, when his sister learned what he had done, he pushed her off the same cliff. Now, have you heard that story, Charles?
Yeah, I've heard that. But I also heard that she just died of a broken heart like 2 days later. And that, yeah.
It breaks.
About the Robert escaping.
Shot on the steps of the... And I, as I said, I've read your book several times, so I tended to take your word on that. But as someone who's writing a drama for entertainment, a lot of times I tend to opt for the more tall-tale. We all pretty much acknowledge that William Butler did not actually vow to kill the town that killed his son. It's a popular myth that it's a fun story. It makes for a good story. So you better believe that that's the version that's used in my book. Were there any other questions before we... Yes, ma'am. Uh-huh. I believe it might be. Did you? Oh, very interesting. So you had heard of him. I don't recall, and keep in mind that the book took me 6 years to write and it came out 3 years ago. So it's been, a lot of my research has been over the last 10 years. So trying to sit there and remember all of the specific names and stuff, I can't do that. I did not. Really? Has anybody here heard of John Landon Butler, who is tied as our claim to the Revolutionary War lineage? I researched into him because, like, on the genealogy sites, it says that he was a Revolutionary War veteran, and so I've looked into joining the Sons of the Revolution. But you have to be able to provide military service records to prove that. And one thing that I discovered getting into that was that I looked up the entire roster for the regiment that he claimed that he was a part of, and there's no mention of his name in it. The only thing that ties him to the Revolutionary War is him submitting a pension request. In which he says that he lost his papers, but he wanted to put in for a pension, which I believe at the time the pension was granted. So if anybody has looked into joining the Sons or Daughters of the Revolution, give them the pension request, because when I tried to look at it, because it specifies, he said that he was, I think it was the 2nd Virginia something. I've got all these details, but like I said, when I pulled up their rosters, there was no record of him being in that regiment. So if anybody can find different records that can confirm that, I would love to hear.
Stay in touch and learn more about all of the history of the Karnes County families. As I do want to mention that at 4 o'clock, we can go to the courthouse, and our county judge, Wade Hedke, will be there and give us just a walkthrough of the courthouse. So I hope many of you could go.
Oh, yeah, boy.
And then at 5 o'clock, we go to the Polish Heritage Center, And we'll have people there that will give us tours, and we'll see a video, and that'll also be very informative. So my presentation today is about the land purchases of W.G. Butler. So I get ideas occasionally, and I was always heard that W.G. Butler and his wife Adeline had 75,000 acres. Now that is a lot of acreage, and I was always impressed by that number. So I wondered, well, how did he acquire this land? And you would think that maybe he made 2 or 3 land purchases, very large land purchases that added up to 75,000 acres. Now, who thinks that might be the truth?
In fact,
No one. Well, so when I started this research, I did expect to find, 4 or 5 purchases, maybe 10 at the most. So I have a copy before it was all over. This is a map of Karnes County, and the aqua, the blue, is what was owned by W.G. Butler, and then that yellow is what was owned by T.G. and Marvin. But I have a copy of this for all of you you can look at while I continue. Just take them. Yeah, and pass them down. So how did he? And I think it's really interesting to see that little strip of land that goes up to the San Antonio River. I love that piece. So I start my research, and I go to the courthouse, and and I look for the deeds, the purchase deeds of the land that W.G. Butler purchased. And to make a very long story very short, these are the deeds that I had copied and made from the courthouse. And most all of them are W.G. Butler's. Some of them are T.G. Butler's. W.G. Butler only sold land. He bought land all the time, but he only sold land twice. He sold land to the group that wanted to form Karnes City, the Calvert, and he sold them land knowing that their plan was to build Karnes City. The other person he sold land to was someone Zachary's familiar with, Newton Butler. And that was an example of he would sell land to some of his children and then often not collect the payments, actually. So I have a spreadsheet, and you'll have to excuse all the notes on it. But in reality, what I learned after reviewing all of these deeds, which you're welcome to come and look at anytime, there were most of his land purchases averaged, I'll let y'all hand these out too. And y'all can keep, you can keep a copy of this. Here, that's my original. Okay, on this spreadsheet, it shows the first land purchases back in 1860. And then I showed how many acres, how much he paid for it, who he bought it from, and out of which survey. And if you count, I counted it once, but all of this land was purchased and kept, except for the two that I mentioned. But the main point I wanted to make here is that this was not a one deal and done project for W.G. Butler. He worked on this his lifetime, acquiring all of this land. And he would have continued acquiring land had it not been for Dalyville. Because after Dalyville, he had to focus on court cases and different things. And there was not much land purchased after that. But I did want to provide you all with this spreadsheet and also the map, so you can see exactly where all of his land was. And I just hope you all find it as interesting as I did, and just imagine how he had to work to each one of these. A lot of times it was bought for failure to pay taxes, so that was probably easy. On some of them, it was land that had been inherited and the people didn't care anything about it, but he still had to contact 5 or 6, 8 people to get their approval to purchase the land. So every single land purchase took a lot of work, and without a computer and without a phone. I mean, I am just amazed that he was able to do all of this and purchase all of this land. I'm also very happy and thankful that many of us have been able to keep that land that he worked so hard to purchase. I think that's critically important, that we continue to give him and our family credit for the work they had to do to keep this land. So I'm going to turn, if y'all have any questions about any of this later, well, you know where to find me. And we'll stay in touch and talk about any of this that you might have questions about. And the other topic I was going to mention, and it's very much related to this, into our family that has kept the land, is the Family Land Heritage Program. And that is conducted by Austin. And you want to hand these out?
Hey.
My claim to fame, I'll let y'all see a picture of it. So the land has actually been in our family longer than is depicted here, but you have to show when the land was purchased. So we've actually been on the land longer than what we're reflecting here, but the land wasn't purchased. Let's see what I'm showing on this report. Was in 1880. They've been here since 1852 and on that land on and off since then, and in most cases it had not been used by anyone else. Occasionally they bought it from someone who was on the land, but most of the time it was vacant land that they purchased. But that was in 1880 when they first started purchasing land.
Sure.
In the Family Land Heritage Program, you have to be able to prove that the land has been in your family for at least 100 years, and that it has been used as ranching or farming, and that you are still doing that currently. So thanks to, I guess, my brother Bill, he really was the one who continued the ranching and had the cattle. So we were able to qualify for the Family Land Heritage, and Gus could too, because August and Gus could qualify also, because they're still ranching, the land that was owned by W.G. Butler. So anyone in Clarence County, I'd hope to get a list of all the family land heritage land. The Hummels back in 2003 also had qualified for the family land heritage. But this is I think the Nichols. Neil, did y'all apply for? Y'all have. Right, and if we were to, so we can move forward, and I guess in another 20 years we'll qualify for 150, or I have to do the math. But this I did back in 2003. But you do have to be able to track every land purchase and show that it was done, by your family. So that's the Family Land Heritage Program. And now you can always call me if you have any questions about that. You can go online. It's really interesting to go online and see all the different ranches. But I forgot to tell y'all, my claim to fame is on this front picture. That's me, the little baby in the cattle trough with the cow on the front page. So yeah, my claim to fame is being on the front page of the Family Land Heritage 2003. You do it. It is required to send a lot of documentation. So I'm proud that we got this done. And
Milestone?
I have to do the math. It's like 150 years, I think, or 120. What was that, 100?
Well,
What? Well, we'll apply, but I called them. It has to be another 10 years or something before we qualify for the next milestone. It'll be like 150 years or something. So thank y'all. And now, if Alicia, are you ready?
I would say thank you to you. So doing that.
Oh, well, thank you.
Just
There you go. Introduce yourself. This is Alicia.
can y'all hear me like this, or do I need a microphone? Can I do that? Can you hear me okay? My name is Alicia Bentz. I'm a Louisa Adams Butler. Louisa Butler Adams was my grandmother, or my great-grandmother, who was one of the original granddaughters. I'm not prepared. I've had a crazy week going on with lots of things happening, but I am an advocate for any of the lineage organizations that we can join personally to keep our names as well as our ancestors' names in all the heritage books. So later on, when people start looking things up and they need a link to my link to Zach, my link to Pat, there's a way for all of it to be traced very easily. I believe that I'm one of the few that is actually a member of the Daughters of the Republic of Texas. That was on my bucket list before I left this earth. And I actually proved the lineage through Adeline Burris, which is WG's wife, and through her family being in Galveston, Texas. So I want to take the opportunity that if anybody is interested in any other research, I'm a member of DRT and I'm a member of DAR. Please get in touch with me. I will give you my name and number. I will help you walk through any applications that you need to go through. A lot of it is really easy. It seems like a daunting task, but you've got to start with your birth certificate and proof to your parents, and then stick with the line that goes back and just get marriage, birth, and death certificates. If you need an affidavit, things like that are easy to come by. A lot of that can be found in your local courthouse. And a lot of it is just common knowledge through different family members may have some of this info. They don't have to be certified copies.
So, and some of the ones that we would share with you, could we piggyback with those?
Yes,
and,
yes.
And fold them into our.
Yeah, yeah. And so basically, my great-grandmother was the sister of all the brothers. And so if we just proved back, if y'all proved back to where that line is, then prior to that is already proven. So you don't have to go backwards. You just have to get from your line back to where the line of all the brothers are under WG. Well, I'm sorry, WG's children. Yeah, WG and Adeline's children. Anybody have any questions? Yes. Okay, well, through DAR, so Betty Gay, basically, who's Karen's mom, Betty Gay Kennedy, Karen's mom, laid the foundation for Daughters of the American Revolution. And I was trying to look up who we go back to. And we go back through, that lineage side goes back to some Meachams. And honestly, it's been 10 or 15 years since I've done it, so I don't remember all the steps in between. But with that, if you're interested in like the Sons of the American Revolution, what I really suggest is tie into what you know or what you can prove easily. And then we're all talking about John Landon Butler being another descendant. After you get in there, there is a vast library of information that unfortunately, as just regular people, we can't get into. But if you have somebody that is in, a lot of that information you can pull up on your own through their national websites. But it's just, they just don't let the public get into it, unfortunately.
You're talking about the SAR?
I believe that's what you're talking about, would be SAR, yeah. Yeah, the American Revolution. Mm-hmm.
DAR is easy.
Yeah. Well, the DAR I didn't think was going to be as easy as it was. But just going back, because Adeline, or the Burrises were actually in Galveston County when Adeline was like 12 to 14. And so that's what I wound up proving back to and didn't have any problems doing that at all.
They were here early during the Republic.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Faithful citizens. Yeah. Does anybody have any other questions? Dr. Houston?
Would you be willing to write what you've said and so kind of sequentially to have it?
I would be more than happy to do that. And also, if anybody needs to see like my applications to see what they look like going back, I'd be happy to email anybody any of that. I think it's a great idea. And, you know, the biggest thing is it's just submitting your name into the long line of Butlers or the long line of Burrises. And so we all want that to continue in the same fashion. Awesome. So please come and ask questions, or if I can give you any information, I'd love to share anytime, any place. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Olmsted. It's your book is really well known to the entire Butler family. Before that, you said that you used to coach sports, and you were a sports writer, weren't you?
Yes. Started out when I was 16, writing sports for the Lake Charles American Press in Louisiana.
And was that, how long did you do sports writing?
Oh, probably 10 years.
Was it a difficult transition going into historical?
No, sometimes I include a little bit of sports in the historical writing. Not much, but I mean, it's still, you know, you're still just kind of researching and, you know, still just putting the facts out there.
So what inspired you to make the leap into history?
Well, the first one was the life and death of Juan Coy. So that was a friend's great-grandfather. And he told me some of the stories, and I started researching more, and it's like, did you know your great-grandfather did, you know, blah, 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 you know? So, I mean, he was one of the ones that was involved in the Dalyville shooting. You know, he was you know, a ranch hand on the Butler ranch. So, you know, and then so after that came out a few years later, Sue called me and said, you know, read your story, you know, book about Juan Coy. You know, we want you to do something on the Butler. So that's how that happened.
So where did you grow up?
Lake Charles, Louisiana.
Okay.
So I mean, I'd, rode horses a little bit. Was not around, cattle or ranching, at all. Probably, I mean, very little if any. But came over here, and when I started doing the research for Coy, it took me down to Karnes County quite a bit. So it's an interesting place,
And so when did you make the move to San Antonio?
That was 1985.
It's the year before I was born.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
Well, what were some of the most interesting places that your research has taken you?
Goliad had quite a bit, as far as just all the cowboy, life and everything. Down to B County, one of the Butlers wound up settling down there. That was probably the two, outside of Karnes County.
You said you actually went to the hospital where Newton died?
No, not the hospital. I went down to the main library.
Okay.
And got the records, as far as his autopsy. I'd had I think it was Sue that showed me the letter, from the attending physician, because he went down there, for the surgery. The surgery, went well. He was recovering, and then all of a sudden, like the, surgeon said, he gets locked in the room. The nuns can't even get in there, and a couple of days later, he's dead.
So Sue worked really closely with you on this.
Oh yeah, I mean, she's the one that got me involved in it. Got me in connection with the people that some of the journals that I used. So very, very helpful.
Yeah, I told her that I wish that I had known when the project was being worked on, because my mom and we have boxes of letters that go back, and because I felt like Newton was someone that you didn't have a lot of information on.
Nope.
And in reading your book, I was like, oh, there could have been this or that included in there.
Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing was that he was married to Mary Elder, and that was it, which in itself is interesting. With the connection with Dalyville and everything. And I've learned more about the train robbery this afternoon from you than I knew, all the other time. I knew that there was, a train robbery down there, and that he may or may not, have had some kind of involvement with it. And I looked, but I never could find anything. And
yeah, if you're like me, it's harder to make time to sit and read on paper, but I do a lot of driving. So yes. Audible is a great resource, and you can look it up. It's an audio book, The Cornette Whitley Gang.
Yeah.
And it's got some really fascinating stuff, and not just for the brief discussions about Newton Butler, but just as a fan of Texas history in general.
Yeah, because that's the first time I ever heard about a train robbery in Texas. I mean, there were in other places, but that's
They carried out 2 train robberies, but the more well known of the 2 was the one in Flatonia.
Oh, okay.
And they did several bank robberies as well. They all pretty much died violent deaths. One of the robbers. One of his friends invited him over, who was actually a law enforcement officer.
Oh, okay.
Who I think had ties to Karnes County, but invited him over, and then the friend shot and killed him, probably for the bounty.
Right.
And there were some real interesting stories about the Texas Rangers being involved in the C Company, I think it was. And the guy that was assigned to it kept on defying the orders of the governor because he was convinced that it was this way. You know, he had this grandiose perception of himself as
Right.
the supreme, most superior law enforcement officer in Texas, and he was kind of a bumbling fool. And he never did catch the train robbers. And
Right.
but who else did you what resources or people did you talk to aside from Sue in writing the Butler book?
I did, quite a bit as far as newspaper articles. Like I said, the Kennedy Library has some old newspapers. Beeville has some of their old newspapers, digitized. Thank goodness, because after going through all the San Antonio papers on the microfilm, I was pretty sure I was going blind there for a while. Trying to see some of that stuff. Newspapers, you provided some information. It wasn't always, 100% truth, but it kind of steered you in the right direction and got you, kind of the basic story, at least.
When you say that, the first one that comes to mind is Wash Butler and John Cooper killing each other.
Oh, yeah.
And they said it in the paper, but it's
kind of hard to believe, but it makes for interesting reading. So, that's. I remember, working at after graduating from college, working at the San Antonio Light for a couple of weeks, or the Express for a couple of weeks anyway. But there was something happening, and I wrote up something. It's like, oh no, you need to change this. It's like, well, that's not the way it happened. It's like, that's what it sells the papers, So anyway,
in my book, when there were little things like that were where things happened for unknown reasons, I took liberties to, for narrative completion, to create reasons for it. I think I wound up blaming the John Cooper thing on the elders, but
I don't know. But there were different, especially when it came to the, the Dalyville shooting, and the trial afterwards, capturing Coy in Mexico. So that was a lot of different things going on at the same time. So,
see, my family has always said, and I don't know what the rest of the Butler family says, but like my grandfather and my mom, they always said that Sykes was the one who shot the fatal blow on Bud Elder.
I've heard that too. And then I've also heard that Sykes, kind of took the fall for some of it, and that's what made him, one of WG's favorites. So, the fact that he, so I don't know.
Yeah. In my book, Sykes is always portrayed as trying to gain his father's favor by being the best, doing what his following orders, what his father says, being the one who didn't go looking for trouble, and always trying to live up to these expectations. And I portray William Green Butler as a man with high expectations.
Oh yeah.
So it was difficult to live up to those.
Yeah. And one name that I haven't heard mentioned in any of the stuff today was Hemis, WG Jr.
Mm-hmm.
He died a tragic, death the year after, his father died. So.
And how did he die? I don't remember.
He died in a car accident. He was, if you can believe it, but they had like race cars back then, that would hit 60 miles an hour, but for the time it was fast. And so he lost control of, some of his car, and it flipped a couple of times in a field and killed him. And there were a couple of people that were riding with them. I have to go back and look and see what happened with them. But he was he had set up a kind of a phone or communication system between different houses, and you know, he liked the fast car. You know, there used to be a race from San Antonio down to Corpus Christi, and you know, I mean, it was like a 12-hour thing, and you know, so all these people would be out lining the road and watching that, and so he became friends with, you know, I think a couple of the drivers. So,
Was there anything that you learned that didn't make it into the book?
Probably. You know, and I've learned a few things since then. So, you know, because I was since 2014 been doing research on the black community in the county, Flaccus, and so, you know, there was a lot of interaction. You know, one of the workers, you know, on the Butler, you know, house, you know, came over, you know, from Mississippi with them, and you know, he was one of the ones that you know, was always with the family. I do remember, you know, one of the stories in there is like, you know, the child started crying when they found out that Uncle Ned was not really their uncle, you know. And there were some things with him, with a couple of the other trail drivers, you know, the one that drowned and crossing the river up north someplace. So, yeah, I mean, not a few things, just, you know, small items, you know.
Well,
Nothing drastic like another day ago, you know.
so was Juan Coy your first book?
Yes. So that was, I think, 2001.
Did you have the same sense of accomplishment when you finally got it finished?
That only took about 4 months to research, you know, and, you know, a few months to write. That, I don't know why, you know, but it was much quicker, you know, to get out and everything.
You know, I look at Lonesome Dove as being the pinnacle of Western novels.
Right.
And it's like 800 pages long.
Yes.
So I thought that's what Western novels were supposed to be. And then after my editor was like, "What are you doing? Stop writing, and you need to take out at least 80,000 words."
Yes.
That's when I discovered that most Western novels are more like, you know, 250 pages, and Lonesome Dove is really the exception.
Yes. I got pretty much the same lecture from my publisher, maybe not exactly the number of words to cut out, but, you know, it had a few zeros in there.
Yeah, it's, you know, mine took 6 years, although to be fair, there was a period in there of like, you know, 12 or 14 months where I just didn't do anything with it.
Yeah. I think sometimes you have to do that, you know, just to kind of like, you know, let your brain kind of go back to normal, and then, you know, you can look at it from fresh eyes, as they say.
And I was hesitant on some of the liberties that I took, because I know that, you know, like people in the Butler family,
Mm-hmm.
you know, especially, you know, people like Sue, you know, when they look at it, you know, they want to see things very accurate.
Right.
And, like, you know, if you read my book, you'll sit there and go, the Butlers were never involved in fighting Comanche.
Right.
You know, as, you know, I use it as a way of explaining, you know, some, you know, PTSD that Newton suffered with. But for the majority of the world, you know, they don't know that. And that's why it says inspired by true
All right.
events. And I always reminded myself that, you know, as many liberties as I might take, my true event, my inspiration is still probably a lot closer than a lot of these Hollywood movies that you say based on a true story.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But I was particular to say not based on true events, but inspired by.
Yeah. And they had interaction with the Comanches and other, you know, tribes. So,
most of it favorably. Yeah, I'll be, the wife bought your book. I just heard about it this afternoon, so I will give that a read as soon as she's finished with it.
I'm trying to put myself in your place, and because it would feel strange to me for someone to come and say, "Hey, I wrote this book that is very heavily based on your work."
Yep.
I don't know. I've probably read it more times than most other people.
Probably read it more than me, maybe, in the last 10 years. So I appreciate it very much.
Yes, well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me before you head out. It is a pleasure to meet you.
Yep, I enjoyed it very much. So.
All right, do me a favor, introduce yourself.
My name's Alan Wright. Live in Decatur, Texas. I'm at the Butler family reunion on this hot afternoon in June 2024. We're sitting in the courthouse at Helena, Texas, and I've got a story to tell maybe later about my ancestry here with the Butler family. But I'm here to answer some questions. You want to start with sources? You want to answer questions? What do you want to do?
And as you mentioned being in the courthouse, I looked up and I looked at this guy on this picture back here. You kind of look like him.
Well, I'm trying. I got the glasses here. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, God, it is hot.
Yeah, it is a hot one. There's no breeze in here. I wish we could get the windows open, but anyway.
So who are you? What is your relation back through?
Okay, most of the folks here are related through an ancestor named Bernal Butler, right? Did I say that right?
Right.
Born 1806 in what county, Mississippi? Scott County?
I think that's right.
Yeah, and my ancestor was Bernal's brother, Landon Carter Butler, who was born in 1800 in Scott County, Mississippi. No, he was born in Logan County, Kansas. As a child, he moved to Scott County, Mississippi. And these counties are all changed now. They were different in those days, so you might not be able to find it exactly that way. But my ancestor was Landon Carter Butler. He was my great-great-grandfather. He had a son named William Ricks Butler, which I think the Ricks family runs in y'all's side too, of that name. And William Ricks Butler had a son named George Lee Butler, who was my grandfather. Apparently he came down here in the 1880s, 1890s to visit his cousins, met a young lady. He decided he would just marry, and they settled here. They wandered around a little, but basically their home was here in Clarence County. So, how was that?
Good.
And my mother was a product of that marriage. Her name was Zella Lucretia Wright. Let me tell you the story there. My grandmother, who married George Butler, was from the Dunn family in Live Oak County, and they had a predilection for Greek and Latin names.
That's an uncommon name.
Yeah. Her father was, her grandfather was Archimedes Augustus Dunn. They also had an Arrhenius Plato Solon Dunn in the family.
The only time I've ever heard the name Lucretia is from a series called The Borgia, which was about the Pope, Rodrigo Borgia. He became Pope right around the Christopher Columbus time, and his niece was named Lucretia. And so it's a unexpected name to find in South Texas.
Well, the Dunns had a number of children, and they all had unusual names, and one of them was Archimedes Dunn. But anyway, that's not the Butler family, so let's get back to the Butlers.
So who were you from there? Take us down the line until it gets to you.
Well, we're almost there. From Lanny Nancy Dunn, who married George Lee Butler of the Butler family here. They had, I forgot how many kids, a bunch of kids. But my mother was Zella Lucretia Dunn. She married William Claude Wright, who was born in 1909 in East Texas. And I'm the product of that marriage. It's kind of an accident. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was a late in life child, but it just happened that way.
So, your grandparents then were?
My grandparents related to the Butlers were George Lee Butler and Nancy Lanny Dunn Butler, who was from Live Oak County, a little community, I think it was called Lebanon. There's a cemetery there at the ranch called Lebanon Cemetery.
Did you spend much time with them growing up?
No, I never knew my grandparents.
Never knew your grandparents.
Like I said, I was a late in life child. My grandfather, George Lee Butler, was born, I think it was 1867 in Mississippi.
Oh, wow.
And my grandmother was born 1873 in Live Oak County, I think.
All right, so let's talk about your parents then.
Well, I don't really know what to say about my mom, but she was a Butler and proud of her heritage. She was born here in Karnes County in 1911, and she met my dad. Okay, here's an interesting story. I think you always wonder, and kids, ask your parents how they met, because my dad had gone off to business college. He had a head for numbers, and somehow or other he got into business college up in Tyler, Texas, and he used to tell the stories about hitchhiking and riding trains back and forth to go to college. While he was gone, they had a farm down in Live Oak County, about 30 miles from here. And while he was gone, a young lady came to live with them as a teacher. There was a schoolhouse, old one-room schoolhouse right behind their house, and it was called La Pera School No. 2. And she was hired on as a La Pera school teacher. So my father came home from business college and found this young woman living in his house with his family and his sisters. And they fell in love and got married in 1934, I think it was. And they had a son about a year later, and unfortunately he was killed in a car wreck, and another son in 1943, Marvin, and he too was killed in a car wreck. So I'm the lucky survivor. I wasn't supposed to be alive, but
Maybe you should stick to bicycles.
yeah, I'm probably a lot worse than they were, but anyway, that's a different story.
Do you have kids?
I have two children. I have William Arthur Wright. William runs in the Wright family. That was my dad's name, my granddad's name, and great-great-granddad's name. And Arthur was his maternal grandfather. And I have Christine Deanne Wright. Her name was chosen by her brother while we were hiking in the White Mountain Wilderness in New Mexico. His mother was pregnant, and our friend asked him what he wanted to name his sister, and he knew a couple of girls named Christine, and then decided Deanne is from my middle name, Dean, so she became Christine Deanne.
Ah. Well, if you were, let's imagine, do you have any grandkids?
No.
Not yet.
Not yet. I was a late in life marriage.
If you imagine that you've got great-grandchildren and they wanted to know about your parents.
Well, that's a bit. My parents, okay, I should be able to narrow that down. My dad went to work in 1936 or 37 for a little oil company out of South Texas called Humble Oil, one of the early employees. And he stayed with them for 35 years until he became Exxon, the big Standard New Jersey company. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and so she raised us kids. She wanted to get out and work, and she did a number of things, but she basically was a stay-at-home mom.
You ever go on any vacations with them when you were young?
Most of the time we came here to the farm here in South Texas at this time of year when it was just as hot as it is now. And later on, we'd get up early in the morning and stayed in an old rundown farmhouse that my grandfather, he actually bought an old hotel in Oakville as the town was declining. Tore it down, loaded it on wagons, and hauled it out to the farm. And around 1920, built the house my dad grew up in there. And that's where we'd come down every summer and sweat. Plenty hot, no air conditioning.
No air conditioning.
No real running water, just an outside hydrant or two. My mother would heat water on an old wash tub on a butane heater, and that's how we took our baths. There was a bathtub in one bedroom, but it didn't have running water, so.
Outhouse?
No, yeah, there was an outhouse. I got to where I'd rather go somewhere else. I wanted to use a shovel. Plenty of woods around.
So what year range would that have been that y'all were coming out here?
Oh, well, I was born in 1951. And you asked about my grandparents. My grandmother died about 6 months, my maternal grandmother died about 6 months before I was born. All the rest of my grandparents had already passed away. And before we came down here from the times it was dirt roads and now they're paved highways. At least once a year. I think it seems to be several times a year so my dad could help his brother run the farm. It was a long drive, there was no interstate and a lot of dirt roads, but we made it, and it was a way of life that I still dream about, and they're good dreams. The old house is falling down, and I hate that, but they were good dreams.
When you think about the differences between, now and those times, how has Karnes County changed for you?
Well, we'd come to Karnes County because my mother would want to come to see her parents' graves and other things. I really didn't know that much about my Butler relatives here then. It was only later, the way I came to these reunions was Sue Butler Carter came to give a presentation in St. Joe in Montague County in North Texas, which was up close to where my son lived, and we were visiting. And we went up and heard her talk about the Dalyville fight. And I introduced myself, tried to explain how we were related, and she told me about the reunion. So that was 2019, and that was the first time I came to a reunion. I think the last one we've had before this one.
Had you, you've talked to me about a lot of research that you've done. Has that just been since 2019, or
no?
Have you been looking into that for a while?
I'm going to talk to the camera again. Kids, ask your parents about your family. Do it now. You'll remember it later, hopefully. Get all you can now, because when it's gone, it's gone. And my dad used to talk about an ancestor in the American Revolution. Yeah, right. And I found out later he was absolutely right. I had quite a number of Americans, patriots as they're called in the American Revolution. The one he'd always talk about was Nathaniel Jeffries. And my mom would talk about her Butler family. I wish I'd listened more. Mostly about her grandfather, or her father, George Lee Butler. She used to tell me he was a deputy marshal, and that didn't mean anything to me. But after she was gone, I was doing some research, and I found his obituary and found out he was a deputy U.S. Marshal in Oklahoma Strip in the 1890s. And if you know anything about that part of the country, that was a rough country. I call it Rooster Cogburn country. He was also deputy marshal in Texas and Alabama and several other states. And this is coming from his obituary in 1944. I found an article in the San Antonio paper where he was interviewed in 1932 about the train robbery here in Karnes County. I would assume he had come down to see his Butler cousins, was visiting them, and met a young lady, fell in love. I think I said this a while ago. Well, he was coming down to see her, according to the article, and a fellow decided he wanted to rob the train. And Grandpa wouldn't have any of that business. Butlers are known for being pretty good with a gun. So he and a couple other fellows got in a gunfight with this robber, and the robber lost. That was in June 1893. And somewhere between them and 1895, I assume he was tried in this very room where we're sitting, the robber. And he was convicted and taken to Karnes City and hung in 1895. So I assume all that occurred in this courthouse here because this was the county seat at the time.
Most likely.
Yeah. And what else do you want to know? You want to go back to William Florin Butler? Or?
Sure, yeah. You've had quite a bit to say previously about William Florin.
Yeah, and okay, when I started looking into genealogy, it's almost accidental, but I was trying to look into several different families. I've got many different families. Anybody that does genealogy knows it's a rabbit hole. You get lost. It's a warrant. But I came across a website that I want to give you. It had an excellent genealogy. Someone named Pamela Butler had prepared it, and I don't remember what year this was. It was probably 2005, 6, 7. And I've got some parts of that. It was extensive, but she had traced the Butler family back to William Florin Butler and Edmund Butler from Ireland. Mm-hmm. That got me very interested in it. I found out William Butler was born in Goochland County, Virginia, probably 1740. His father was Edmund Butler, apparently from Ireland. And somewhere in here I've got a county someone speculated it's from. I don't know if that's true. He married Phoebe Childress, and this I didn't tell you, one of her descendants was George Childress, who signed the Texas Declaration of Independence, and the name of Childress, Texas is named after him. Oh. So anyway, they married probably about 1760 to 1762 in Prince Edward County, Virginia. And that goes back to the affidavit I think I was talking about. I forgot what I've already talked about.
I'm going to tell my parents about the Childress thing, because on the drive from Houston to Colorado, we have to pass through Childress.
Yeah.
And we often stay in that
Yeah.
town because it's kind of the halfway mark between us.
Well, I've found several sources that give that story, that it might have been her nephew, but it was from the Childress family. He moved to Texas, and I think it was the Declaration of Independence, 1836 he signed, and they named the town of Childress after him. Anyway, what else was in there? I'll get back to William in a minute. I guess it was their first son, John L. Butler, and I speculate the L was for Landon because there are a number of Landon Butlers in my side of the family. And I've encountered that in someone else's material, but I can't positively say that. Anyway, their son was John L. Butler, and he gave birth to several children, one of whom was my great-great-grandfather, Landon Carter Butler, 1800. Another one was Bernal Butler, 1806. I believe they had different mothers. I think the first wife passed away. And another group of the family that's around here somewhere I've never found, they had a sister, Elizabeth, who was older, born 1796. She married a man named Rankin in Mississippi, and they moved here to South Texas. So the whole bunch of them moved here to Texas somewhere around the 1850s. My grandfather came a little bit later. His father stayed in Mississippi for a while, became a Baptist minister, and George came probably 1890-ish, give or take. Now, William Florin Butler. There's a lot on William Florin Butler. He was apparently kind of a hot-headed, opinionated fellow. The University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill has 5 folders on William Butler. He was known as William the Regulator for the Regulator movement, the anti-tax movement in North Carolina. They felt the taxes were oppressive. Matter of fact, I believe he was appointed a tax collector. And then he decided that the system, he didn't like the system, didn't feel it was fair, and turned on the governor, who was trying to build himself a new house with all that tax money. And there's a number of books about that, and he's actually mentioned in some of the film presentations about the regulator movement. Warrant was issued for his arrest. He was actually convicted of riot. It wasn't spelled that way, and sent us, I think, a fine. I was looking at it last night, 6 months in jail. I don't think he did any. I understand they broke him out of jail, and his brother was the sheriff of the county, so he was pretty secure in hiding out from being arrested again. Until the governor, Tyrone, lost his job, and another governor was appointed, Josiah Martin, I believe, and his brother John convinced the new governor to pardon William Butler.
Is that how that happened?
Yeah, and there's a number of letters in that North Carolina collection between his brother and William, and I couldn't read them all, and they're difficult. I mean, they're well over 200 years old, going on nearly 300 years old, some of them. So, but that's how I believe it happened. And his brother John went on to become a general in the Continental Army.
One thing I've learned reading really old documents is that people's handwriting was really terrible. So was oftentimes their spelling.
Oh, yeah.
And I think a lot of times they tried to compensate for their poor spelling by being really elaborate in their writing.
Verbose, yeah.
And you wind up with a lot of stuff that is today indecipherable.
Yeah, it's difficult to read. Now, the letter from his mother is fairly easy to read, and some of the other letters are not too bad, but they're just, a lot of them are just fragments. But it's an interesting collection of material on William Butler. He was a major figure in the North Carolina and the pre-American Revolution movement against royal taxation. So he was a revolutionary before the Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
So, and as you know, it kind of culminated in a battle in Almatz, North Carolina, and that battlefield is well marked. It's all saved. You can go there and you can walk the battlefield now. And I don't know if he was there, but a number of them were captured and later hanged in Hillsborough, and there's a monument to them, the regulators. So that's a good source of information for them. There's a couple things I'd watch for him. Telling you, there is another John L. Butler. His name is really John Low Butler. His grandfather was William Florin Butler, but he's not our John L. Butler. He's a different one. He ended up joining the LDS Church and died in Spanish Fork, Utah. But before he died, he wrote his family history and sets out some of his genealogy back to William and Phoebe. So that's a good source, and the LDS Church has written some because he was one of the early founders. And so I think that would be a good source of information. I think I'm going to try and look into that. And there's another place that you could trip up real easily somewhere, and I've heard different reasons. William was granted some land in Edgefield County, South Carolina, along Fox's Creek on the Savannah River. And when we went back to South Carolina last year and found a copy of the affidavit, the archivist actually looked up some maps of his property and made me some copies of them. I didn't bring them with me. And it turned out, I believe the hotel we were staying on was on his land that he was granted. He died there in 1790. Now, looking for records for him is a little tricky because there was another William Butler there that was very well known and a figure in the American Revolution. He was actually from Saluda, but the same area. And when you go through those records, it's easy to get that William crossed with our William. And I was trying to find the other William's wife's name. That's the easiest way to find it because it's Bethesda or something I can't say, a big word. But if you're researching William Butler, you got to be sure you got the right one. He died in 1790. And Phoebe then went on to try and probate his estate. She shuffled from South Carolina to North Carolina, Iredell County, I think it was, where one of her sons was living, and ended up in Simpson County, Kentucky, and there are some land records on that. She's listed, and John Butler's listed, and James Butler, who was John Lowe Butler's father. They all moved to that Simpson County, Kentucky area, and then down to Mississippi, where Bernal was born.
Okay.
Have I lost you?
No.
I'm not sure I haven't lost myself.
Well, it's always important that we do our best to find ourselves.
Yeah, we're working at it. I've got some sources here. I don't know if you want to set them out or not, but if anybody wanted to, some things that I have found. You want me to get into that?
What would be good is if you could email that to me, and when I put this whole project together, I can hopefully maybe even put little pop-up links so that people.
Well, basically, I'm going to tell you real quick. The North Carolina State Archives has some material. University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill has some material, those original documents I was talking about. South Carolina State Archives and Edgefield County, South Carolina Archives has some material on William Butler and Phoebe Butler. There's some children's research I found online, and the excellent bibliography that Pamela Butler put together, and I cannot find her anymore. I'm angry at myself for not following up. I was just beginning this, and it's a lesson to be learned for genealogists. Find your sources. It had her phone number and an email and everything, but it's all changed now. And I would love to find that one. Edmund Butler of Colonial Virginia, that's another one, and I think it may be related to Pamela Butler's because it's similar material but not exactly the same. So that's some sources, and that's important. You know, that's a good place to start researching William Florin Butler and Edmund Butler. So I got that in.
Yeah. You said you used to come out here when you were a kid. Did y'all?
We came to Live Oak County, which is not too far from, well, it adjoins Karnes County. And my mother would bring us over here occasionally to just see where she was born and grew up. She was born in 1911 and daughter of George Lee Butler and Nancy Dunn.
Was it their land or was it extended family's land?
Oh, the place we came to visit was on my father's side.
Okay.
His grandfather, John William Wright, had purchased his wife. My grandmother was kind of ill, and they thought she should move to a better climate, so he moved down here. I'm not sure it's a better climate, but there is a place.
And what unit compared to what?
Yeah, well, East Texas is pretty hot and humid too.
I spent a lot of time out in East Texas in Nacogdoches.
Yeah, it's pretty hot and humid. And my dad was actually born at the foot of a place called Wrights Mountain in Tyler, in Smith County, Texas. It's right on the Smith County line and, I forgot the next one, Longview, whatever county that is. And it's still there. A big sign on the highway says, Joy, Wrights Mountain Road. And his parents led the music in the Joy Baptist Church, just north of Wrights Mountain. So that's how they ended up down here. My grandfather moved down here for the sake of his wife's health right at the end of World War I and during the Spanish flu epidemic. They all got very, very sick. And my dad used to tell the story that being new people down here, they didn't really know anyone, and his dad had rented a small house of some kind outside of George West, and they all came down with the flu, and it was cold. He said his dad would go out every day and chop ice off the horse trough and get them some water, and nobody knew they were there, and they were all sick. And a Mexican vaquero, a line rider, rode by, didn't speak any English, but my grandfather made him understand there were a bunch of family in there and they were sick, and he said a couple hours later the whole town came out and brought them milk and eggs and food and took care of them. And he liked to tell that story, how the people of George West saved them. So that's the way things were back then, I guess, because the Butlers did the same thing with the Czechs.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
All right.
I don't know what the question was. You remember?
No, I don't. It was about coming out here when you were a kid and whether it was family land.
Well, it was the old house my grandfather built, and he had 2 daughters and 2 sons, and one of the sons, my Uncle Carol, stayed there to farm, and my dad would come down to look after him, be sure he was okay, because he had some problems, and help him fix things. I remember one time when they climbed up on a windmill and pulled all the pipe, and I thought, oof, that's not something I want to do, especially in June in South Texas. That kind of stuff, you know. My dad was a country boy at heart, even though he became a clerk and accountant for the biggest oil company in the world.
I live in the mountains of Colorado, but I am at heart a South Texas country boy.
You can't get it out of you. Once you're a Texan, you stay a Texan.
Yeah, it's if anything else ever comes up, or any projects that you want to work on and talk about, you're more than welcome and invited to come up to Colorado.
Oh, where it's nice and cool, yeah.
Yes.
And they got good hamburgers. You haven't been to that hamburger place. Where's my wife? She'll tell you about that. She found that hamburger place in Colorado.
And we can enjoy some, mid-70s temperatures and low humidity, swaying pine trees.
Beautiful country up there, and a lot of Texans moved up there. That's where Charlie Goodnight went before he started the Goodnight Ranch here in Texas. He drove herds up through New Mexico and up into the Raton and southern Colorado area.
You could not pay me enough to move back down here permanently.
Yeah.
Brief visits.
Yeah.
Preferably in January and February.
In the fall. I have seen it snow down here, but it's pretty rare.
We were down here in February of 21 when we had that freak cold snap that shut down all the power, and we got 6 inches of snow out at the ranch. And this was my kid's first time coming down to Texas, really, especially in the winter. And I told him, I said, it doesn't snow in Texas. And then cows are walking around with 2 inches of snow on their backs.
Yeah.
I said, well, that made a liar out of me.
And I'm sure that you experienced some of this. I'm glad that I got to see that way of life before it was gone. We had the outhouse, and it was rough. I didn't have to live with it permanently, but my uncle raising his own food, and I remember this Thanksgiving turkey Tom that I became friends with and walked out on Thanksgiving Day, and he had that turkey up there cutting his throat on a limb, and I did not eat turkey for years. I didn't eat Tom. So, but it was a way of life that's gone now, and I'm glad I got a glimpse of it. And my dad used to talk about riding a wagon into Beeville to get bricks to build the chimney. And my mom, her dad was kind of a rambling man. George Butler was kind of a rambling man, and they moved off to East Texas. And she told me about moving between Limestone and Leon County one time in a covered wagon before World War I. And I've got a story in our genealogy magazine, San Angelo Genealogy and Historical Society. I've got a story about my dad when he saw his first automobile when his Uncle Charlie came to visit from California. And it would have been again before World War I because they were still in East Texas. It's a funny story, but I don't need to relate it here. He got caught on the car when Uncle Charlie left and headed out the gate, and he thought he was going to get drug all the way to California.
When I think of Karnes County and what it means to me, it usually comes down to ranching and hunting.
Absolutely.
And
this is Lonesome Dove country.
I do a lot of hog hunting out here.
Yeah.
And when we hunt hogs, we don't do it with guns or rifles or even bows. We run them with dog and knife.
Ooh.
The dogs catch them and we stick them.
That's just a challenge there.
And both my daughters, including Zyra over there, have killed hogs like that. She was 10 years old when she killed her first hog.
Wow.
And my daughter Alexis, she was 7. She killed 2 that day.
Wow. With a knife?
Yep.
Okay.
They are some...
You see, it still runs in the Butler family. They've just graduated from guns to knives. We're going to cover it.
They are some little huntresses.
Yeah.
And Zyra's, she did her hunter safety course, I think, when she was 9. And, you know, she's shot a couple of deer. And so I've been trying to teach my kids, you know, the skill of self-sufficiency.
Yeah, that's good to know. I'm kind of a let my wife buy it at the butcher market kind of guy.
If the grocery stores ever, you know, stop,
I'll starve to death. But,
and they'll be out getting the food for me and my wife.
Yeah, they can take care of you. Well, you know, my mom was proud to be from Karnes County, and very proud to be a Butler. And I wish I'd asked her more about her family when I was a kid. And that's one of the things I would like to get across to people. While your parents and your grandparents are alive, try and get all the information you can.
I say the exact same thing.
I saw a bell over there when we came into the courtroom here, and it reminded me of my mother was a school teacher, La Paris School number 2, and that was her school bell. And somewhere along the line, I lost that. And I hate losing those family treasures like that. I know where I lost it, but I can't get it back. And that's just something that should be in the house. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, we do have some lamps. I'm sure you got your family thing. We've got some lamps and clocks and things like that. We've got an old salt pinch thing, heavy crystal that came from England in the 1700s in the family. That would have been with the Duns, though. So,
well,
Butlers have done a great job here of maintaining your connection to the county and the history.
Yes. I think we've covered pretty much all we can for right now, and it is sweltering in here. You and I both have just beads of sweat drifting out of all of our pores.
If there's anything I wanted to talk about is the sources that I can give you later, but somebody might want this and want to look it up. And a couple of stories. Look for William Florin Butler. He was a well-known character and fairly influential in his day. He sure influenced his neighbors, so he was right there in history. And so was William Green Butler, as we know, and my grandfather Butler. And so there's a lot of history in the Butler family, and there's a lot left to learn. So, kids, ask your parents.
Thank you for sitting down with me.
I hope you learned something. I didn't plan this.
And now we'll see if we can find some towels and dry off.
All impromptu. And I want to show you some stuff here in a minute, but we don't have to do that on camera.
Sure.
Oh, I put in a plug. San Angelo Genealogy and Historical Association. We won the top prize 4 years in a row for our magazine. And you wouldn't think so from little old West Texas County. This cover has actually got William Green Butler's house and tombstone on it.
I see the house, yeah.
Yeah, and the jails that are sitting outside of Helena.
All right, thank you very much.